Okay, so hello and welcome back to this little corner of the internet. Thank you for finding my video. Today, I would like to talk about the Scholomance series, which I have just finished, which is a lie actually. I'm recording this video a few weeks after I have finished this series. The memory is still fresh. The Scholomance series is actually a trilogy. It's the Scholomance Trilogy. It consists out of 3 books. The first is A Deadly Education. Second is The Last Graduate. The final one is The Golden Enclaves, all by Naomi Novik. I'm actually quite happy with this trilogy. I am going to explain why. But first of all, the series, this trilogy, these books are about a school, the Scholomance, which is an elementary school or high school. I think, I'm not sure about that. Not so fresh memory after all. Anyway, it's a school designed for young wizards of the world. These magical people with magical powers are apparently a very good food source to monsters, basically, in the world. These monsters, these Maleficaria, I cannot pronounce it. Whenever I read the word, I just skipped over it. But it's shortened to Mals. Basically, these monsters feed on wizards. Young wizards are especially tasty, apparently, with all their young wizardry and magic. Therefore, the Scholomance school was created to protect them. But it kind of turns out that this school is also not very good for them because they get eaten all the time anyway. It turns out that a very small percentage of the students who go into the Scholomance school in the first year graduate in the last year, and even the graduation is a huge mess. The graduation is the final test, basically, whether you can survive out in the world on your own or not. A lot of students die during that graduation process. So actually, I suppose the school kind of failed with that goal of protecting young wizards. In this school, we follow our main character, this girl who is destined to be a device of mass destruction, and she's not okay with that. She keeps emphasizing how useless, burdensome that is to her. So obviously, as you can guess, throughout the trilogy, her character develops into a much more mature, much more appreciative type of person, and she learns what her gift, what her natural ability towards this mass destruction spells and mass destruction magic can give her, and how she can use it to her advantage, obviously, as we would have guessed. I found this trilogy because I am a huge fan of Kerstin Gear's Ruby Red trilogy. Ruby Red, Sapphire Blue, and Emerald Green. In original German, they are the Edelstein trilogy. I just love that trilogy. I've read it in, I think, 3 languages so far, and I am going to begin in a 4th language that I'm learning at the moment. I think that would be the perfect way to practice that language on my own because I love that trilogy. Maybe I already know complete lines of it. I'm very much obsessed with that trilogy. Maybe I'm biased because I read it as a teenager and I loved it as a teenager. Maybe my glasses are a bit more tinted, a bit more rose tinted towards it. But as I've mentioned, I have read it a lot of times over and over in different languages. Even as an adult, I can say that I enjoy it very much. I can see the faults of it, but I can see the allure of it. I think it's very exciting. The characters are amazing. There are so many characters and they all have their own individual personalities, and What am I doing? I'm not here to drool over the Edelstein trilogy. Anyway, let me know if you want a video discussing that trilogy and those books, because I would love to, but I don't think there's really an audience for it. Maybe it's a very hidden book that not a lot of people know, or the fan base of it has died out or never existed. I don't think it would be a very popular video, but let me know if you want that. Anyway, I love that trilogy with all its faults, but with all its brilliance, and I wanted to read something similar. So I asked ChatGPT actually what could be similar to that trilogy. One of ChatGPT's recommendations was the Scholomance series by Naomi Novik, which is also a trilogy, coincidentally, and that's how I found it. Moral of the story, I guess, is that if you want good recommendations and know how to use ChatGPT effectively, because I needed to give it very specific instructions and detailed information about my personal taste. If you know how to use it and are wanting to get good book recommendations personalized to your taste, use ChatGPT. AI can be good for something, seems like. Reading the first book, A Deadly Education, sometimes I found it so British, so very British, that I felt like I needed a translator into an English that I actually know. Fortunately, I do have British friends that I could ask, but then I decided not to out of embarrassment. Another note, one of my favorite romance tropes is enemies to lovers when done right. I think nowadays with the modern books, it's a bit, feel like it's not so deep. One of the reasons why enemies to lovers tropes work is that first, we go deep into the relationship of the characters who are enemies or hate each other for some reason. For the trope to be successful, we first really have to understand and see and feel how and why they hate each other. And that is one of the reasons why I love the Edelstein trilogy so much, the Ruby Red trilogy, because we really see the main character and the love interests dynamic and how they interact, why they have the feelings towards each other that they do, and how it slowly develops into something more tender. We see the clues, we see the signs of how they start taking a liking to each other. Now, the enemies to lovers or haters to lovers trope is really popular, and therefore a lot of authors try to integrate it into their books, but it doesn't really work, or it's not so well fleshed out. So usually we just get the fact that they are enemies or they hate each other for some reason, but we don't really know why, we don't really see their dynamic, and it immediately develops into deeper feelings and romance. I don't think it's really what the trope is about, and I feel like it's a cheap way to cash grab on a trope that is popular right now among young women. We see this especially with TikTok books, for example. There is actually a really good video about that. One of my favorite content creators on YouTube regarding book topic, the reading book sphere, ABBIE EMMONS. She has a really good video explaining the enemies to lovers trope, and she gives very good insights into how it can be well used. I will link that video below in the description. How that relates to this book is that in this first book, I felt like it was something a bit similar to that. In this first book, I didn't really get why we hate the love interest so much. Like, it was clear that he was going to be the love interest. It was clear that this is a guy that we're focusing on. And there was just this hate towards this person, towards this guy in our main character, which I do sort of get. Like, we get some kind of an explanation of why this feeling is there, but I felt like it wasn't well fleshed out. I didn't understand completely why we hate this guy so much. There are two components to this, in my opinion, throughout the whole trilogy of 3 books. First, we got a very strong feeling of hate toward this guy, which then kind of disappeared, or we didn't really hear about it so much, and then they started becoming friends or hanging out, and then it just kind of lingered in the background. And in the very last book we get a bit more romantic or a bit more tender feelings, and then all of a sudden these 2 people, spoiler alert, but I guess you can guess, they get together. I felt like the whole romance line of the story was a bit rushed. This one minus point for the book. I understand that the main focus of the book was not romance. A lot of the story was about something else other than romance, but our love interest, this guy, was an instrument too, and a huge initiator and help in our main character really growing into her own, finding her purpose, finding her way of using her natural abilities, and etc. I felt like the romance part was a bit too rushed. We could have gotten a few more romantic scenes throughout the trilogy. I was expecting that, and the romance line of the story would have been more captivating and fleshed out if there were a few more romantic scenes throughout the story, so we can see these 2 people's relationship grow gradually throughout the 3 books. That was something that I was missing. Oh yes, I noticed in the first book, but then throughout the whole series, that sometimes the paragraphs were just weird. I couldn't find the logic in them sometimes. The writer starts talking about one thing in the paragraph, then goes on to another, and then another, all in the same paragraph, and also sometimes went back to the first thing in a new paragraph. It was a bit confusing to follow. In my opinion, paragraphs should be a rather clear distinction between topics or feelings or lines of thought. Sometimes I just really missed a new paragraph starting, because sometimes, not always, but sometimes this resulted in huge paragraphs and a lot of topics being discussed in one paragraph. Going on to The Last Graduate, my notes include, actually my first note for this book was lots of unnecessarily long paragraphs, little dialogue. I don't know what else to say about that. There was a lot of long paragraphs for little reason. I feel like this book especially was a bit stretched out. I think half of it could have been taken. Okay, not half of it. I feel like some of it could have been taken out. Maybe instead put in a few more romantic scenes to move the romantic trope, the relationship between the main character and love interest a little bit. That would have been an idea. And going back to the little dialogue point, I felt like the characters don't communicate whatsoever in this book and throughout the whole series. They just do not communicate. Somehow, all of these teenagers are so bright that they just understand what the other is saying without really saying anything, or saying like a half sentence, or just saying like a vague indication of something they're aiming at, and then the other is like, oh yes, and then saying something similarly vague back, and they understand each other. These are teenagers. There was just a lot of school politics going on. Lots of politics, lots of thinking, lots of interpretation, which is great for someone who loves that kind of stuff. I'm not so into politics or like this thinking through all of the intentions, all of the hidden meanings of everything that's being said or everything that's being done. Where do I sit? What do I do? And if I do this, that means that, and then that will be interpreted by others as this, and but if I do that, then And these are teenagers. But because it was school politics mostly, except for the last book, I don't want to spoil it, but some big things are going on in the Wizard Society in the last book. But normally in the books, it's mostly school politics, which is good because at least I understand. So this kind of politics, this kind of interpretation, thinking of actions and consequences and whatnot, I do understand, so at least I could enjoy it. But it's definitely not my thing to go through multiple paragraphs of trying to interpret what your action might cause and how others might think of you and what should you do to evoke the right image and whatnot. But I still enjoyed it. I think it was well executed and it was interesting to listen to all these thoughts of this very, very bright, very, very smart, very, very clever 16-year-old or something like that. Overall, this whole series, so interesting. I couldn't put these books down. I devoured the whole trilogy in like 1 or 2 weeks maximum. It was very interesting. When I had asked ChatGPT for a recommendation, I was looking exactly for this experience. What is this trilogy really about? What is this trilogy trying to tell us? What is the moral of the story? What can we see in this story that we can learn from or apply into our own lives? After all, a book should teach us something, especially if it's a whole ass trilogy. One of the main things that I gathered from this trilogy is a point on moral responsibility. It's highly emphasized and pointed out that just because you're born with darkness, you can still choose to be good. The author is trying to tell us, in my opinion, that the things you're born with don't define you. They don't determine who you are or who you can become. The choice is in your hands. You are born somewhere, some way, in some situation, but it's always in your hands what you want to do with it. Our main character is born with a huge darkness in her, something she feels that determines her, something that she kind of knows for a fact. I don't want to spoil that part. It holds a great loom over her future, and she's scared who she will become due to this natural darkness in her. Even in the first book, so this is not a huge spoiler, she makes a point of emphasizing that she will not become dark. She, all her life, aims to stay on the right track, keep this darkness concealed, not let it get out. Again and again, even in the most difficult, most stressful, most frightening situations, she chooses over and over again to be good, to do the right thing. And that choice is in all our hands. So what happens if you've destroyed everything, but you don't know what to build in the place of that previous thing? I see this very prominently, I think, in a modern society, in our current society. There are cohorts of people who are fighting against specific things, but very few people now, I think, are fighting for something. Very few people have fleshed out and distinct ideas of what to fight for. And fighting for something can mean just something in your own life. You don't have to think on a global scale necessarily. It can just be something as simple as choosing to be yourself, choosing to be authentic, choosing to build a better life for yourself. And what that means is something very personal to you, something that you can define, but you should. It is something that you must define, something that you have to flesh out to the point, not very detailed, but you have to be able to bring something new into the place of a crumbling old thing or an old thing that you want to crumble down to the ground. Also, a huge point in this trilogy is that we survive together. When we're alone and each and every person is doing their own thing, even if it is to the detriment of others, even if you have to trample others on your way out, quite literally, in this trilogy, that might not result in the goals that you're aiming for. You might not get what you're looking for at the end of that road. We survive together. We need each other. We're social animals. I do agree with this. We have to stick together, stand together to be successful and create a better world. And then finally, my ratings. I have a rating system. I have some questions that I ask myself regarding specific parts of a story. On Storygraph and Goodreads, I did rate these books individually because that's the only thing you can do. And of course, it's very important for books in a series or a trilogy to be able to stand on their own. I think it's something that's often forgotten in the community, that just because it's a series, of course, it will have better and worse books in the series, but overall, each and every book should be able to hold its own in the series as well. You can just look at the series and say that, oh, it's a good series. I know the first book is a bit hard to get through because the writing is awful, but overall, it's a good series. You should go to the second book. And I'm not sure about that. If I'm not convinced by the first book or the second book or the third book, I'm not going to read the next one. Or maybe I will, but still I will have a very bad opinion on that specific book. Each book should convince me to buy and read the next. On that note, I do have each book rated individually on Goodreads and Storygraph, but now I think I will look at the trilogy as a whole. First, I look at the plot and the story based on my specific questions that I usually ask in this category. The plot and the story got a 4.5. I was debating between a 4 and a 5, as you can see. 4 seems like very little because I do think that the story is very interesting and I really like the points that the story raises, the points at least that came across for me. But 5 seems like a bit too much for this story, just because the story is not 100% unique. But that's not a problem. That's not a problem at all. My main reason for deducting half a point in this category is actually the ending. The ending is a bit, just like, it is satisfying, it is good. But as I said, I would have liked more building romance between main character and the love interest. I think that would have made the ending more satisfying. And in general, the solution at the end for the whole problem feels to me not as cathartic as it could have been. But that's just half a point. It's not a big deal. It was really good overall. I did really enjoy it. The characters got a 5 from me. I really liked the characters and their motivations and where they came from. Each character got their own unique personality. It was very easy to get to know them. I felt like the characters were well fleshed out, and the characters who needed personal growth did go through that personal growth very nicely. And then the writing style got a 4 from me. Very good, but very British. As a non-native English speaker, I just had to deduct a point. It's not a bad thing at all, but just made it very difficult for me to read sometimes. The setting got a 5. Very interesting idea with the school and how the school works, and I liked to have a few insights into the workings of the school and this world. The emotional impact 5. I do not wish to elaborate on that, aside from the fact that I've mentioned that I just couldn't put it down and I always had to turn the next page and keep on reading because I was so emotionally invested. And even after finishing the trilogy, I was just left emotionally. I felt like I could let out a huge breath. It was very satisfying. Thank you, Naomi Novik, for this hard to describe emotional experience. Thank you. There are some other considerations, things like how much did this story impact me? How much was I thinking of it after I finished it? Would I recommend it to others? Things like that. So the other considerations also got a 5. I would definitely recommend it. I would definitely recommend this trilogy to anyone who's interested. As you can see, my final rating of this trilogy is quite positive. It was a really good trilogy. I am very glad that I read it. And thank you, my local library, for having these books. I do recommend this trilogy to anyone who is interested in fantasy world, magic, wizards, school politics, interesting characters, not so much dialogue. Be prepared for that. Maybe even to those justice warriors. It could be interesting. It raises a few good points, as I've mentioned. If you do read this trilogy or have read it, I would be very curious to hear your opinion on it, to hear your insights, if you agree with me or not, and why, or whether you gathered the same moral of the story from this trilogy as me, or something different. Please let me know. I would love to see what other people thought was the point of the story, what it highlighted. I would love to hear your thoughts, and if you have some recommendations that are similar to this or Ruby Red trilogy, I would love to hear that as well. Let's stay in touch. I am very happy that you were here. See you in my next video. Oh yeah, and like and subscribe. Thank you.